The Mongolian People's Army or Mongolian People's Revolutionary Army was established on 18 March 1921 as a secondary army under Soviet Red Army command during the 1920s and during World War II. Creation of the army. One of the first actions of the new Mongolian People's Revolutionary Party authorities was the creation of a native communist army in 1920 under the leadership of adept cavalry commander Damdin Sukhbator in order to fight against Russian troops from the White Movement and Chinese forces. The MPRP was aided by the Russian SFSR Red Army, which helped to secure the Mongolian People's Republic and remained in its territory until at least 1925. 1930s conflicts. Initially during the native revolts of the early 1930s and the Japanese border probes beginning in the mid-1930s, Soviet Red Army troops in Mongolia amounted to little more than instructors for the native army and as guards for diplomatic and trading installations. However, in the 1939 battles of Kharkhin-Gol, heavily armed Red Army forces under Georgy Zhukov, assisted by Mongolian troops under Khorlagyan Khwaibulson, decisively defeated Imperial Japanese Army forces under Michitaro Komatsubara. Cold War era. During the Peitashan incident, elite Qinghai Chinese Muslim cavalry were sent by the Chinese Kuomintang to destroy the Mongols and the Russians in 1947. The military of Mongolia's purpose was national defense, protection of local communist establishments, and collaboration with Soviet forces in future military actions against exterior enemies, up until the 1990 Democratic Revolution in Mongolia. Political indoctrination. The Central Political Administration Unit was established in the army in 1921 to supervise the work of political commissars and party cells in all army units and to provide a political link with the Central Committee of the MPRP in the army. The unit served to raise morale and to prevent enemy political propaganda. Up to one-third of army units were members of the party and others were in the Mongolian Revolutionary Youth League. The Red Mongol Army received 60% of the government budget in early years and it expanded from 2,560 men in 1923 to 4,000 in 1924 and to 7,000 in 1927. The native armed forces stayed linked to Soviet Red Army intelligence groups and NKVD, Mongolian Secret Police, and Buryat Mongol Komintern agents acted as administrators and represented the real power in the country, albeit under direct Soviet guidance. Training. By 1926 the government planned to train 10,000 conscripts annually and to increase the training period to 6 months. Chinese intelligence reports in 1927 indicated that between 40,000 and 50,000 reservists could be mustered at short notice. In 1929 a general mobilization was called to test the training and reserve system. The expected turnout was to have been 30,000 troops but only 2,000 men presented. This failure initiated serious reforms in recruiting and training systems. Strength. In 1921 to 1927 the land forces, almost exclusively horsemen, numbered about 17,000 mounted troops and boasted more than 200 heavy machine guns, 50 mountain howitzers, 30 field guns, 7 armored cars, and a maximum of up to 20 light tanks. Basic units and motorization. The basic unit was the 2,000-man cavalry regiment consisting of 3 squadrons. Each 600-plus man squadron was divided into 5 companies, a machine gun company, and an engineer unit. Cavalry regiments were organized into larger units, brigades or divisions, which included artillery and service support units. The chief advantage of this force was mobility over the great distances in Mongolia. Small units were able to cover more than 160 kilometers in 24 hours. List of Mongolian Army divisions and other units: 1st Cavalry Division, 2nd Cavalry Division, 3rd Cavalry Division, 4th Cavalry Division, 5th Cavalry Division, 6th Cavalry Division, 7th Cavalry Division, 8th Cavalry Division, 9th Cavalry Division, 10th Cavalry Division, 7th Motorized Armored Brigade, 3rd Separate Tank Regiment, 3rd Artillery Regiment, Aviation Mixed Division, Chemical Defense Engineering Regiment. Army ranks and insignia: conscript soldiers, private lance corporal, corporal, senior corporal, NCOs, junior sergeant, sergeant, senior sergeant, training sergeant equals sergeant major, lead sergeant or command sergeant major officers, second lieutenant, first lieutenant, captain, major, lieutenant colonel, colonel, brigadier general, major general, lieutenant general. General uniform. Because establishment of the armed forces was based on a Soviet military system in 1920s, the Mongolian People's Army used similar uniforms with the Red Army, only with Mongolian distinctions. Until 1924, People's Army personnel wore traditional deal, which had their respective shoulder insignias. In the mid-1930s, the Army adopted Soviet gymnastika and developed its true rank and distinction system. All personnel were distinct by their sleeve and collar insignias from the general population when the gymnastika was rather popular. After the Battle of Khalkhin Gol, slight modifications were made. In 1944, all uniforms and insignia were significantly changed to include shoulder insignia and camouflage cloaks, similar to Soviet uniform modifications but on olive green. From the 1960s, the equipment and uniforms of the Mongolian People's Army were included a program to modernize the military. As before, the Mongolian People's Army was similar to the Soviet Red Army in appearance and structure. Military actions. Units of Mongolian People's Army were supported and allied with the Soviet Red Army in the Battle of Khalkhin Gol in 1939 and on the western flank of the Soviet invasion of Manchuria in 1945. Domestically, it took part in the suppression of the 1932 armed uprising. It also involved in many border conflicts against Manchukuo and the Kwantung Army and the Chinese National Revolutionary Army. The Imperial Japanese Army recorded 152 minor incidents on the border of Manchuria between 1932 and 1934. The number of incidents increased to over 150 per year in 1935 and 1936, and the scale of incidents became larger. In January 1935, the first armed battle, Halhamiao incident, occurred on the border between Mongolia and Manchukuo. Scores of Mongolian cavalry units engaged with the Manchukuo Army patrol unit near the Buddhist temple of Halhamiao. The Manchukuo Army incurred slight casualties, including a Japanese military advisor. Between December 1935 and March 1936, the Araho-Doga incident and the Taura incident occurred. In these battles, both the Japanese and Mongolian armies use a small number of armored fighting vehicles and military aircraft. Stalinist repressions against Mongolian People's Army. Light equipment. Mosin Nagant, PPSH-41, PPSH-43, Russian M1910 Maxim, SG-43 Gorunov, DSHK Dejchiriwov machine gun, artillery and mortars. 37 mm anti-tank gun M1930, 76 mm regimental gun M1927, 45 mm anti-tank gun M1937, 76 mm regimental gun M1943, multiple rocket launches. BM-13 150 anti-aircraft weapon. Although little attention was paid to anti-aircraft weaponry in the Mongolian People's Army, a few dozen units of Soviet origin were known to be distributed to light armored outfits. Vehicles. Gaz-61, Gaz-64, Gaz-67, ZIS-5, Gaz-MM, ZIS-42, Studebaker US-6, Dodge WC-51 Armored Corps. Under Soviet support campaign for mechanization, the Army formed its first mechanized unit in 1922. Also it was by structure in the ground force, half mechanization, cavalry and the other units distributed to light armored vehicles until 1943. It began to process to motorized since 1943. This is a list of Mongolian People's Army tanks and armor during the 1922's World War II period. Armored cars: Russian Austin Putilov 2/3, Soviet Fi-15, Soviet Bar-6, Soviet Bar-10, Soviet Bar-64. Light tanks: Soviet T-27-10, Soviet BT-5, Soviet BT-727. Medium tanks: Soviet T-34, Soviet T-34, 85-33. SPS tank destroyers: Soviet Su-100. Mongolian People's Army aviation in 1925 to 1945. The Mongolian People's Army aviation drastically improved with Soviet training and vastly ameliorated within a time span of several years. In May 1925, a Junkers F-13 entered service as the first aircraft in Mongolian civil and military-related aviation. In March 1931, the Soviet Union donated 3 Polikarpov R-1s to the Mongolian People's Army, with Mongolia further purchasing 3 R-1s. In 1932, an uprising broke out against collectivization, which saw both Soviet and Mongolian-operated R-1s taking part in actions against the rebellion. The aircraft carried out reconnaissance, leaflet dropping, and bombing missions. Chinese intelligence reports that in 1945, the Mongolian People's Air Force had been with a 3-fighter and 3-bomber aviation regiment, and 1 flight training school and greater air squadrons. It was reported that headquartered in the Mukden Manchukuo spy section in October 1944, Air Force whole units had been 180 aircraft and 1231 flight and technical personnel. The Mongolian People's Army aviation demonstrated its full potential during the Battle of Khalkhin Gol, which was its largest engagement. Apart from intercepting intruding aircraft, People's aviation was used heavily to repress domestic rebel movements. The Mongolian People's Air Force has operated a variety of aircraft types: Trainer Po-1, Po-2, Yakovlev Ut-2, Yak-11. Bomber and ground attack aircraft: Polikarpov R-1 unknown number, Polikarpov R-5-40, Ilyushin Il-2-70. Fighter aircraft: Lavochkin La-5-12, Polikarpov I-15-50, Polikarpov I-15 bis unknown number, Polikarpov I-16-1, Yak-7 unknown number, Yak-9-34. Transport aircraft: Lisunov Li-2, Gan-3, Kalinin K-5, Yakovlev Yak-6, Junkers F-13, Junkers W-33-1, Nakajima Ki-34-12, Yakovlev Air-6. Mongolian People's Army capability: Mongolian People's Army Air Force